I'm Harry Box. I'm the manager of PERG. And so thanks for coming and joining us today. This is Running a Successful Rental House Part 2, the Equipment Life Cycle. As always, thank our sponsors, Anton Bauer, Arri, Astera, Duclos Lenses, Lightgear, Panavision, Taylor & Taylor. These are the companies that support everything that we do, and we're really delighted to have their support. The last week's coffee break was the client experience, and if you missed it, you can use this QR code to get to that link. You can't get to this coffee break without the link, and we will be sending a link out to PERG members, but we kind of want to limit it to people who are in rental companies and specifically people that are in PERG members. We have a couple of cool coffee breaks coming up on the 13th. Katie and a DP will be talking about the Sony lineup. Next month, we have Matt Duclos from Duclos Lenses doing a coffee break about the craft of the lens technician. Super important. Today, we are really delighted to have with us some great panelists, each bring their own perspective. Just like last time, Allison Couples is, of course, our moderator. She's the coordinator of EWI. She's worked in a rental house for more than 15 years. She was a senior account executive at High Output in Boston. She's also on the board of Woman Film New England. Hans he's general manager of Lux Lighting. He's helped start that company from the ground up. Before that, he was manager at Pascal Lighting. And Ryan Halsey is the owner of Serious Grippage. Thanks, Ryan, for joining us. Ryan he was a film school grad. He worked in the industry. He's been a gaffer, cinematographer, an editor, director. He still actively works in the industry in the New Mexico area. Hey there, Michael. Michael, of course, Michael Koerner, Koerner Camera. Needs no introduction.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. Absolutely appreciate you being here. And of course, as Harry said, thank you to our panelists for joining us and giving your time. So last time we talked about the kind of building blocks and the strong foundation, building a strong foundation for the rental house and client relationship. And as you saw earlier, Harry has a link. We can share that video so people can look at that as who have not seen it. And today we're going to talk about the equipment quality, which is a hugely important element at every rental house. You can't really have a rental house without it. So we're going to talk about the kind of quality professional grade rental inventory that's so important. So the equipment cycle and your inventory management, really your ultimate goal is to provide to your clients well-maintained, modern, and technologically relevant equipment. And what does that mean? And we're going to cover all what that actually means. So I identified some phases that kind of equipment goes through in the rental world. So your first phase at the rental house for equipment is, what do you buy? How do you buy? How do you choose what to buy? So we'll talk about how to be strategic with those decisions. Phase 2 is preparing for your inventory addition. What needs to be done before the equipment arrives in your warehouse? What steps do you need to take to make sure that you're ready when it does arrive? Your third phase, when your equipment does arrive in your warehouse, what are the first steps? Does your staff need training? Things like that. We'll then go from there into phase 4, which is when it's kind of in its active rental lifespan, and maintenance is paramount during that period. How do you keep your inventory relevant as it gets rented and is on your shelf for many years? And then when do you retire equipment? What's the end of life look like? How do you make those decisions? And do you sell? Thank you. We can move on. So to my panelists, how do you know you're buying the right equipment, and how do you know that equipment will rent within your local market?
Well, with us in Oregon and Washington, there's a number of different ways that, or reasons why we buy equipment. You know, everybody's always looking on the internet, seeing what the latest developments are in new equipment. Typically, we wouldn't buy equipment until it had a certain number of requests, you know, 3 to 5 requests. And then my employees would say, we have to buy this, we have to buy this. Later, it became, that's still sort of a rule of thumb, as well as just knowing the trends in the industry and seeing what the larger markets are doing. And we're sort of in a secondary market or in the Northwest. And so we can see the trends there. One thing with smaller rental houses like ourselves, more boutique, we're much more reactive to new equipment. A lot of the big rental houses in the on the film side anyway, they can't make a decision without having a meeting. You know, but the smaller rental houses can make a decision like that, get it FedExed in the next day, and have it in the inventory for many months before some of these larger rental houses. So that also makes us makes us stand out a little bit, and I think that's true with a lot of smaller more boutique rental houses.
Yeah, and to just echo what Michael's saying, one thing that we really value is like vendor relationships. So when you ask, what are we going to purchase? A lot of it is dictated by timelines, knowing the vendors, knowing the manufacturers, knowing the release cycles, knowing what's pushed, knowing who's coming out with what and what may be a successor to another thing. That really informs, kind of what we look at, because we try to be at the earlier phase. We try to get things before the frequent requests come in. The way I like to phrase it, and Harry said I used to be at Pascal Lighting. I was a rental agent there, and similarly, we would say, it had to be on a list. We'd wait for it to end up on a list. At Lux, we like to say we put it on lists. So we try to get in on things early, whether that's through, showcases with demos, with vendors, or going to shows, or just getting private demos and being aware of it. And then if it's the product that we think is going to have a good market share, we buy into it, and to a certain degree gamble on the fact that it will have some success early on.
Yeah, and something else I should add when you talk about vendor relationships, I think it's also important to mention other sub-rental relationships we have with like rental houses that we're friends with, and we sub-rent back and forth, because sometimes we'll say, oh, well, they're buying that, I don't need to buy it. When I first, the first 15 years of my rental house, I wanted to have everything, but I knew it wasn't practical. And then as we get more advanced and more developed and more mature, if our friends have it in the Midwest or in San Francisco, they think the same thing with something that we have that they don't have. So we all don't have to have the same gear. We have such tight relationships with other PERG and non-PERG members in our rental house community that, we sort of work together.
No, and then to echo that a little bit, one thing is also, and Michael hit it on the head, of knowing who else is buying things, but also knowing what those people do traditionally with like rental rates. Because if you know a company's buying the same thing you are, but they rent at a lot lower rate traditionally, you may not be as inclined to, because if you know it's a lower rental rate, the general community knows that it's a lower rental rate. So it's also looking at the overall landscape to make sure that your ROI is there through the product itself, and not also that, somebody else is going to tank it for you.
I think, sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, no, I was just going to add, because I know in New Mexico, it's a bit of a strange market from the standpoint that it's a relatively small market. There's not a lot of commercial work inside things, but, we have a lot of big Hollywood here, and there's piggybacking on what, Hans was saying, as far as knowing really what MBS and Lease are kind of the big whales in town, what they're stocking a lot of, because I know for our company, we try to be judicious in what we'll invest in. namely coming down to what gets requested, heavily, which usually takes a year or two after new products come out to really kind of build steam, and what sticks versus what is just kind of gimmicky. But we also kind of look and see what is underserved a lot. So, out here, MBS, Cinelease, and Universal, just as an example, they never really invested much in light gear and light mats. So, it was just an area of opportunity we were able to kind of do more of and then subrent to them. Because a lot of that also kind of builds into, we have a lot of owner operators in town for the big shows and the like, and kind of we're close with, we have a good network in town and are close with a lot of the crews and stuff. So we kind of get their feedback on things they may want. We have a lot of distribution deals still, old holdovers with most of the manufacturers, to where we can kind of help, with purchasing for owner ops and things like that. And it kind of gives us an idea of what, is going to be worthwhile investing in, and what kind of is going to stick and be more popular. And then, of course, I think like the last consideration, at least for our company, is if it's an item or a piece of equipment that I will drag around on shows that I'll gaff, because ultimately, if it's something, I'll work in conjunction with those other factors, and that helps kind of, cover the cost, make it viable more in the long term.
Right. So I think Michael touched on this a little bit, but we're all really, a lot of people at rental houses, most people at rental houses that I've met are really into the gear, and are kind of keeping up on market trends. They're getting introduced to gear a lot, but just because you think it's really cool doesn't mean it'll necessarily rent in your market. So you can't just buy everything. So it is really about trying to nail in, kind of focus in on those smart purchasing decisions for the rental house, and not just.
It's sort of hit or miss, I mean, I think most of us, not all of us, are batting 100% on gear purchases. We're batting okay. We're batting way over 500, but we're not 1,000%, 1,000%. So it's pretty interesting. And it's sort of like, if like my father's generation saw our industry, they would say this industry doesn't work. The amount of capital you have to put into it for the return and the lifespan, which we'll talk about later, it's pretty bizarre, the amount of money that's spent on equipment. And the return might be a decade.
Is a trusted brand always a 100% guaranteed kind of rentable item? So if you're buying an RE camera,
not on the camera side.
Yeah.
I don't think on the lighting anymore either. No. I mean, I remember when I kind of got into the rental world 15 years ago, you had your HMIs and your tungstens, and there were instruments that you could bank on. This is going to be, a workhorse for 20 years and, not think twice about it. And I mean, gosh, in the last 5-8 years, the tech evolves so incredibly fast now, and there's so many new lighting manufacturers, and yeah, it's definitely, I think you can't just chase the tail and try to get the latest and greatest. At least we're not big enough to cover that kind of overhead. But yeah, we had definitely, like if it is an airy product, something that has like an extremely strong brand, I mean, it certainly gives you more peace of mind that, it'll be a solid piece of equipment for time, for a good while in the future. But yeah, it's definitely weigh the pros and cons.
Yeah, what's interesting about brand recognition to the question, Allison, is for the longest time, there was only a few brands, and now, to what Ryan was just saying, it's saturated, and not too much, but a lot more than it used to be a decade or so ago. And what we've seen, and I would argue, is a lot of product now, we've hit the good enough phase. So one thing that I think, touches into what you were just asking, the Sky Panel X is a great example, I think. It's the newest and greatest from Arri. It's a great fixture. No argument about, its workability, its color, all the things. It's great. Problem is, vortexes have not been phased out yet. Vortexes have filled that. still good enough gap. And until vortexes came around, sky panels were good enough. Or you could get, you know, a P600C from Aperture, good enough. And so now you can see there's a lot of tools that get the job done, which is like, you know, to what Ryan was just saying, there used to only be, there's one Area Max. There's no other Area Max. An Area Max is an Area Max. Whereas now you can kind of find the solution that if you're buying works for your budget, if you're renting works for your budget, there's enough options that brand isn't the winner anymore. Now it's the ancillary stuff, the support, the pricing, the demand. I would argue brand is almost less important than it used to be.
Right. So support is actually, I think, a really big factor in terms of purchasing decisions too, because you want to know that, well, one, the manufacturer is going to support the product they're making. Are they going to be, you know, putting out new firmware updates? Are they going to be, you know, are pieces going to be available for repair, right? That all makes a huge difference, because if you don't, you're not going to get that kind of support from your manufacturer. Are you going to buy that piece of equipment?
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
I think we see that a lot. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think we see that a lot right now with all these new lens manufacturers on the camera side, that there are so many lens manufacturers, and you know, they're overseas, they're in country, and it's not like you've got Zeiss behind you or Lights or Fujinon or Cook. It's a small startup manufacturer that might not have a service center. You know, it's really frustrating. And yeah, they produce a good image, a decent image, sometimes a really nice image for a good price, but I'm not into buying disposable lenses, you know. So
let's go back one, Harry, to how do you predict market trends? Kind of what are your tools? What gives you those clues about what's kind of up and coming in your market?
I mean, I
know.
think that's, oh, sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just gonna say, I know for us, because again, I don't think we're a very typical market in New Mexico, but you know, we have a strong network of gaffers and keys that we work with a lot and regularly, and you know, I think like bottom line, ultimately, it's really like what do they want us to carry? Like, what are they wanting to drag around with them on shows? And you know, and kind of like I was saying, how, you know, would I work this on a show kind of deal? And I think that's our starting point most of the time, because if we can ensure, like, oh, if I pick up, you know, these new Astera products because, you know, our couple gaffer friends are asking for them and are like, yeah, if you have them, I'll rent them. That definitely, I think, like for us, is kind of like gives that peace of mind a little more with newer stuff, if yeah, people are wanting to take it on long-term rentals.
Yeah, no, it's in similar to what Ryan was saying, it is all about customer interaction and knowing what your customers are looking at and what trends they are seeing. And eventually over time you learn that, and it becomes kind of a predictive model. But right now, for example, a lot of people I work with, the fixtures they want need to have, you know, XY color space ability. It's keyword. Everyone's saying it now, a lot of people that I would rent to. So if I'm looking at stuff that from a rental market may not be the top conversation point, but if I'm talking to a vendor, it's one of the first things I ask, because it kind of informs to me where you are as a manufacturer in meeting the request of the people that we work with. So it really, I think, just comes down to, you know, customer needs and what we might see as a gap now, and knowing what we know coming out, how that may predict the future purchases.
How do you find out about new equipment?
we find out about new equipment a number of different ways, whether it's, it's a big gossip. Everybody's always talking to everybody. All the other rental houses are talking to each other. You're talking to owner operators, you're talking to customers, you're talking to manufacturers. So mainly it's through personal relationships, but then you're looking again online, social media, things like that, postings. Then you learn more and more about the new equipment. I mean, like, we have a big sort of big migration every year to go to different trade shows, right? We go to NAB, we go to Cinegear, we might go overseas. Some people come to Lens Summit in Oregon, but what really is people are going there to, for the most part, to see their friends. They already know the new equipment is coming up.
No, I think Michael's spot on 100%. It's gossip, it's word of mouth. It's people go to see things, or people, stuff brought to you, and you trade information with other people, and it just becomes kind of a self-serving thing. And eventually you just find out about stuff naturally, I guess. I don't know if there's a solid model. It just kind of comes at you from every angle.
I mean, we find out about the details in publications like the Film and Digital Times, right? For us, camera and lighting. And then, there's in-depth articles that educate the user or the purchaser, and also in the other publications. But F&D Times is really the one that, really explains things and goes into deep dive on tech issues.
And the only other thing I would add to it is, I think all of us in this meeting have, a lot of the high-end relationships with vendors, with manufacturers, relationships that have, developed over the years. Whereas one thing that I would tell my younger self, if I was somebody, how would I learn about gear? I think it's incredibly valuable to go to those trade shows, to keep up on marketing materials. Something I, as a rental agent, didn't really pay much attention to, because ultimately it was just an asset to make money off of. So I didn't go to those shows. I didn't build those relationships. So as we're talking about people that are kind of on the up and up, and coming up from, maybe out of school or indie, I think going and finding that gear is also incredibly imperative.
Having those vendor relationships is uniquely important, because you do you get vendors coming to your rental houses with equipment too,
All the
to
time.
show off their new gear?
Or we'll do an event with a vendor to showcase something, and just giving more opportunity to the public to see and meet people.
And then when you get close enough with the vendors, if you need something, they'll just loan it to you for you to rent out, which is really nice. If we have an item that's down, or they're giving a demo, they'll say, hey, keep it for a month. And then, they'll let our customers test it out. I was really sort of surprised at that when it first started happening. I'm like, really? But they're like, yeah, they want everybody to get exposed to it and buy it.
Yeah. I have to say that was one of my favorite parts about working in a rental house, was having vendors show up with new equipment.
And then on the rare, occasionally, you make recommendations on how you think something would be better, and then, the next generation of that product, you see it, and that you had a direct impact on that product. That's pretty rewarding.
Yep. And we did touch on this a little bit. We can move to the next slide, Harry, about kind of keeping equipment relevant over time. How do you do that? So once it's in your rental inventory, obviously maintenance is a really big factor there. And we'll discuss that a little bit more deeply later on. But also getting firmware updates, right? I mean, I think firmware updates is newer in the lighting world than it is in the camera world. But very relevant in both worlds now.
Firmware updates are my sore sticking point in the entire industry. And every manufacturer, every vendor that knows me will reiterate that I think there's a terrible system of notifying about firmware updates. And between each vendor has an app, or is it on their mailing list? Is it on their social? Or do you have to be on an email list? And is that to distributors or dealers or whatever? There's no uniformity to it. And I think firmware is the toughest thing, because if you're not up to date and someone gets your light and it's one revision off, you hear about it.
And what happens with us a lot on the camera side is there's an owner operator that has a camera on like their camera, we're the second camera on a 2-camera shoot or whatever. And the owner operator's firmware is, you know, multi-generations back. And it's another selling point. Go to the rental house. Don't go to an owner operator that has ill-maintained equipment.
Yeah, there's a strange catch-22 because like updating your computer or your phone, you always know that first major update probably has a glitch. And then you wait for the 0.1 release. And you might do a thing where for the longest time we didn't update for X amount of time because we knew this was stable firmware and that would get us through and you wouldn't have any problems. But then a customer gets the light and they go and update the firmware to the newest version. And now we have to go on the flip side. And as we're checking gear in, check the firmware updates, which we previously, you know, that's not part of the check-in process prior. Sky panels were a great steady thing where you could just put a P-Touch label on it and say this is the firmware and you didn't touch it for 6-8 months. Aperture might be on the week. And so now that's, you as a rental house, we don't have the ability to lock out the end user on that. So it's a very sticky wicket of situation because somebody could brick your light on set and you wouldn't know it happened.
Yeah, it definitely gets tricky. Yeah, cautiously optimistic with firmware. Because yeah, a lot of stuff, especially in the last few years, you know, with Lumen Radio switching over to the TMO 2 and yeah, I highly recall, you know, on a couple shows having to go back through all like Astera products and stuff and actually upload a previous older firmware because it had the newest one had a lot of glitches and would cause a lot of problems with you know, newer transceivers or transmitters and the like, and it just, you know, wasn't, the bugs weren't worked out. So it was always a little yeah, definitely having to pay attention to it a lot more than, you know, I'd say once upon a time where maybe every couple years there'd be a new firmware. Yeah, with a lot of the wireless tech and other things, it's fast and furious.
And another thing I should say about firmware, I typically find out about firmware updates, whether it's through Canon, Arri, a number of other manufacturers, Small HD, it's a posting on social media. You know, and it's like, people give me a hard time about being on my phone, but it's like, hey, there you go.
So now we've chosen to buy the equipment. We have to prepare for the equipment to arrive, right? So we have to think about the shelf space. How do you approach this when you're getting a new piece of equipment? How do you approach kind of you know, usually you're not just buying one piece of equipment, you're probably buying a few of something. Certainly in the lighting world, camera world, you might buy just one camera potentially. So how do you prepare for making sure it has the proper space? What are the things you have to think about?
This is always even when we were talking about this in the sort of warm-up meeting, this is the tough one because this is the oftentimes my team will attest we will ultimately just end up with stuff and dump it on them without any type of planning or notification. And I think that just has to do sometimes with life cycles and release cycles because you may plan to buy something in January and it may not come out to December, even though you thought it was going to come out in February. And so sometimes just a matter of like, all right, when it gets here, we reorganize a little bit. And luckily our shops are well organized, well maintained. We have great staffs for that. But I think that at the end of the day, just that's ultimately probably the quickest rush job out of anything we do, in my opinion. Because I mean, I don't know how everyone else acts, but like from the Lux side, I'm also a big fan of casing because we don't really do full shows. We are primarily a support company. So I try to get everything cased out, even though most people probably wouldn't agree with that. So then we're having a plan of like, okay, are these stackable cases? Are these cases on wheels? And so the shop may need organizing from time to time just to accommodate that motif.
Big investment, those cases.
They are, but ultimately, I hate people saying I got it that way. It's one of my biggest pet peeves in this world. So if I could say it went out safely in a case, I'm okay with it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, I'd say usually for us, there isn't a lot of circumstances where we're buying, say, 50 units of this light to where we're going to have this massive influx into inventory. So shelf space and the like, it's always yeah, kind of keeping it with like other things and organized with accessories and such to a degree that our shop folks and interns and the like, it's logical. Yeah, most of it I would say is that labeling and just branding the equipment, because our stuff will inevitably go out as a sub rental or something on a show with 4 other vendors and an owner op, and making sure we have kind of a standardized cohesive branding means, so it's easy to identify, and the like is usually more of the time consuming. But it's such a case by case basis, because a lot of times we'll buy a good chunk of gear that is going on a show right away, and it lands on the from freight as the show's loading out, and
Mhm.
yeah, it's just kind of a mad rush to get it tagged, labeled, and out the door, so it can get on rent right away.
So that was thank you for that amazing segue, because my next question was like, what kind of labeling does your equipment require? Right. You have to make sure people know it's yours. So you need your name on it. What else do you need on it?
So I mean, just for us, cable, we usually have some standardized color coding for lengths of cable that kind of go across all things, and making sure it has our name on it, and then usually a color as well. Lighting instruments and stands, and some of those we actually will have metal plates we can rivet on that are a little more solid than a sticker. But I mean, we have stencils, so it kind of runs the gambit depending on the type of material. For rags on the grip side, or flags, we have a ton of little patches that we'll sew on, as well as just sometimes it just comes down to where we're grabbing a paint pen and having to put SGL and our phone number, and
There you go.
yeah, and there's some other little thing, like on the rags, we put change out the ties, and we put blue tips on our ties, and little pinstriping kind of things that help differentiate from, like I said, really we're swimming in a fishbowl with MBS, Cinelease, and Universal, and especially MBS out here. I mean, they've in the time, the handful of years they've been here in force, I mean, they bought Hollywood Rentals, they bought Pascal, they bought Leonetti, they bought TM, and so all of their gear is still floating around with their branding even on it still. And yeah, so we definitely, I would say that's the area we'll put extra time into, just to make sure our stuff is very clearly defined, delineated from competition, and yeah, to make sure everything's very well labeled, because it's not uncommon. Some second unit will come back, and here we got 4 other people's pieces of equipment instead of ours, and got to start the phone calls of, hi, I have your gear, do you have mine? And the like.
Yeah, the only really niche things we do, because labeling, exactly like what Ryan was just saying, assuring everything's clear and clean to avoid just that. Do you have mine? I have yours, mix up. But we add, when we have gear come back from jobs and we go through the QC and testing process, we label it with a particular color coded system to just say, hey, this was teched by this person on this date, so that we know when it goes out the next time that at least somebody had hands on it and and inspected it when it came in, so we feel good when it goes out and that it didn't get overlooked. We also have crew consignment gear, so we have that labeled in a certain way so that we know when we check out certain things that it needs to get checked out this way, because that's how Rental Works treats it as consignment. So certain shortcuts for our own staff, but otherwise pretty much aligned with what Ryan was talking about.
Are both of your houses barcoded?
We are, yes.
No, we're only in New Mexico. We don't have multiple locations outside the state. So really kind of we did look into it. It just, for the cost that comes with and everything, it just really wasn't a benefit for us to have that, you know, tracking ability when we're, you know, very familiar with all of our inventory, and we have the QC methods to, you know, keep track of our stuff when it, you know, comes in, when it goes out. But yeah, barcoding it to have the scanners and tracking it, it was just kind of not really required at this point in time. You know, if we end up branching into Texas or Colorado, yeah, it might be a lot more beneficial.
Yeah, we don't barcode yet either. You know, we've looked into it, but barcoding is just as good as whatever else you're doing. If it's not scanned by the barcode scanner, you know, it's just like it's not checked in or out, you know, on a piece of paper. So, you know, and we've been stumbling along for a long time without barcode, and we seem to be doing just fine.
And even without barcode, you're giving them kind of unique asset numbers, I would imagine. So
Oh,
you can
yeah.
identify, you know,
Everything's numbered and labeled and all that, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah, and it's certainly inventoried in our database. You know, we've looked into RentalWorks and some other companies. The kind of legacies, we just have a custom database built on FileMaker that, you know, I inherited it 15 years ago when I started, and you know, we're working with a really good IT company now, and that's easily customizable. So there's certainly pros and cons, but for the size we are and the variety of business we do, because I mean, we try to diversify as much as possible to where we do a lot of photography rentals, production supplies, camera support, grip, lighting, and for student stuff all the way up to, you know, ASA features and pilots and the like, that we're able to customize it, and it works really well for us. But you know, it's all things like if we did keep growing and had, you know, locations outside the state, yeah, I think certainly some of the larger companies that have that infrastructure set up to help track inventory across state lines, yeah, certainly would be something we'd look into. But yeah,
we use a FileMaker, you know, relational database as well, and it's forever, and just keep adding on to it and customizing it, and it's super efficient.
Yeah.
Hans, are you barcoded at Lux?
Yeah. Part of it is just that's just the system I came from at Pascal, so inherited in my own mindset. But it's also good for, as you have new employees, making sure that they are checking out the right thing, because it'll give you a nice verbal warning if you're not. But we only go at the top level. So if it's a head or a power supply, we don't really have like an official threshold that's X dollars, but just sort of the more hero items, I guess. But we don't barcode like stingers or chimeras or anything.
And why is it important that each kind of asset is labeled individually and that you can identify, you know, camera body number 1 or you know, sky panel number 6 from number 10? Why is that important?
Conflict catching for one, and maintenance, you know, locations, you know, a number of things. I mean, the big, you know, as I said in the last session, what we do more than anything, you know, people think it's a really techie industry, which it is, obviously. There's always new tech coming out. You always have to upgrade, but the main thing about this industry is logistics and making sure that everything is where it's supposed to be when it needs to be. That's primary.
Because well, I know you're going to get to it, and maybe I give you the segue, or you have a few slides, but that end of life cycle conversation where we're looking off to sell assets or thin out, it's also good to be able to look at individual assets and say, okay, we're going to sell 10 sky panels. What are the 10 oldest ones, or what have the longest usage?
Yeah.
Let's offload those first. So being able to track that asset.
You're not supposed to say that. You're not supposed to say that.
All right, so moving on, once you've talked about kind of the physical, we did talk about database here a little bit, so we did have a segue into this conversation. But what advantages does software offer you? I mean, even a well customized FileMaker Pro, what does that offer you? You know, why do you need that over just say an Excel sheet?
Well, like what, I'll start out with our FileMaker. You know, the whole idea about a relational database is that these different modules can sort of communicate with each other and you can customize it. And so what we ended up doing was, like when I do invoicing, you hit the invoice opens up an email in our Mac mail. We're on Mac. It puts that PDF of the invoice in the email to the client that, you know, is on the client line for invoicing. And it keys in the subject line, the invoice number, the client number, whatever you want. And so it's a one-stop shop. You know, you invoice, you don't have to copy it, you don't have to print a PDF, pull it out of a PDF file, create an email yourself. It's just one button. And the same with consigned equipment or ACs that have their equipment on a job. When we hit invoice, a little window pops up and it says PO owner operators. And then you select that box and then you do the rental split, whatever the deal is for the job after discount. And then it says, then you email those consigners or the people that own it, the camera assistants on the job, and it also automatically creates the email. Then you can review it and hit send. But it's just a huge time saver for us. And I don't know if you get that through RentalWorks or
Well,
other.
I think the one thing that you did mention is that I think was important, especially, is that you talked about the different modules. So it's not just it's being like the sales module of kind of your database where you're quoting and you're sending quotes to clients and using that to communicate with clients about the equipment they're renting. Then there's kind of an operational side where you're recording history, you're communicating with your shop about what needs to be pulled for certain orders, and then invoicing. So you kind of have all these separate modules built into your software that's facilitating communication across the whole rental house, which is kind of one of the things that makes that software incredibly valuable.
Well, not only the rental house itself, but also with the customers. So if a customer's done a partial return, you can send them a report of, hey, this is what's out. Or you may have a customer, I'll just use like an MBS, for example, where you know they have an item on rent and that's going to come back on X date. And on Y date, their coworker needs that exact item for another order. So you can just jump it over from order to order and just say, hey, talk to, you know, Joe down the hallway and just take it. Don't bother returning it. I'll do it on paper. I'll give you the check-in, the check-out. We can do it all here. And so it just gives a lot better insight as opposed to like the QuickBooks question or just the invoicing, which is just kind of like one direction. It went out, it got billed, but then you don't really have a lot of insight of when it's due back. And maybe you can roll that into another order or get creative on that date and how you can work with a customer. Maybe there's a day off, but you can buy yourself a date. It just gives you a lot of granularity into the customer service aspect.
Yeah, I know file makers, that's, I mean, one thing that's been really helpful, I know from our standpoint, is those analytics. It's being able to just dive into either a, you know, if you wanted to see how a specific item has rented over the years, or, you know, its popularity, its service track record, you know, how often does something fail on it and we're having to get parts, or, you know, whatever that may be. Having that customization has been really great from an analytics tracking standpoint, aside from just automation, because ultimately always trying to see how to save, you know, somebody sitting behind a computer doing, even if it's just routine data entry. Yeah, because especially on big orders, you know, and shows, there's, God, there could be like, you know, 1,000 grip items from every little clamp and baby pin that they're requesting. And, you know, I remember first starting, it would take half a day plugging everything in, where, you know, finding better ways and ways to automate and you know, improving the system and the database to cut that time way down as much as possible.
And then the other thing that the database helps you track, right, is kind of we talked about usage history, but also kind of the financial history.
Well, and then
So,
that also informs to your, like, basically the first question of purchasing decisions, because then you can look at sub-rental history or consignment payouts and really look where you may be spending money on a consistent basis that you could mitigate, whether that's for us moving inventory that may not be renting in location A, but is renting a lot in location B. And location B, maybe, they have for the consignment and we're paying out for stuff that's otherwise dormant in other locations. So I think it's just a great asset, great insight into asset utilization,
mhm.
how you can improve upon it.
And something else to mention about equipment is an equipment payback and equipment desire. If something's really cool, is you might just buy it. So, and it's a lost leader, right? So it's something that doesn't go out very often, but you have it. People are going to come for it, and they're going to rent other regular stuff of yours, for one. And then two, it might be so rare that it's really hard to find as a sub-rental item with other rental houses. So when you have we have a big commercial that comes in from LA or something and they want this, it's like, yeah, we got that, so it's something that may take a really, really long time to pay off in its lifetime, and it probably will, but it's a silver bullet, that we're always looking for, is having a silver bullet, whether it's a special lens or a special camera item or special filters even, on our side. So that's always something that we've tried to have, is that kind of silver bullet.
So we're going to touch on the subject, but I know it's a really big one and we could probably do an entire coffee break on it, but pricing. And which is really different than quoting. How do you set that initial rental price for an item? Kind of what are the factors that go into that decision?
I look to other rental houses and see what their prices are typically. And then, you sort of can just figure it out. If it's a monitor, it's going to be, 1/20th of the cost. If it's a camera, it might be, 1/5, 5% of the cost, or something.
Yeah, so you're saying the purchase cost definitely goes into sort of that initial rental
The
price.
stuff that costs less pays off way more, way quicker than the stuff.
Purchase cost and comparable items in the past. For example, when the Sky Panel came out, that was 300, 350 to rent. So, eventually the Vortex came out, that became the 300, 350 light, because that's sort of the price we'd established on Sky Panels. Sky Panel X comes around, similar, maybe a little bit more because it's a little bit more of an expensive light, but not too far off. That's not going to be a $600 light. That may be a $400 light. But to Michael's point, sometimes you really strike gold, and through scarcity or lower cost, you might be able to pay that off really quickly. I usually typically I'll shoot for a 20-week ROI. There are some people that do a 15, and if you come out better, all the, kudos.
Yeah, I know the metric we've used a lot of the times, which I mean, it's just kind of a starting point, is that, 15 factor. And, we do a lot of commercial business and rentals and the like that are, just for a day or two during the week. But like Michael was saying, a lot of it is determined by the competition and supply and demand. Like we don't necessarily list prices on the website because every client, honestly, it's like we have, rental prices per day for every single item, but it's so rare anything will actually rent at just a straight up 1 day for 1 day kind of deal, because we're always happy to work with clients and help people out. We work with a lot of students and others, and to where, yeah, and the stuff MBS and CineLease sometimes will dictate is quite a bit higher, just because everything's renting at a 1 day week, and they don't really do small things and little one-off rentals. So we just, I think it's trying to be flexible and just, seeing where things are in just our market specifically, because we get a lot of clients that are based out in New York, and they come here and they're like, well, what do you mean a Sky Panel would be 400 for the week? And it's like, well, I could get it for 200 back in New York. And it's like, yeah, I know, but you're
A
in New
different market.
Mexico and there's not a lot of them here, and they're all on this one giant show
Yeah.
in a stage. And if you want it, this is what it's going to cost. I'm sorry, you know. But no, we obviously try to be ethical in everything we do, and definitely try to just work with our clients. You know, and it usually only gets hard lines, I'd say, only really get drawn when it's equipment owned that we have on consignment from an owner op, or sub rentals, just because then there is a cost we have that, you know, we're not going to be able to go below that or anything along those lines.
Yep. Or like
No,
dollars
I
that
see.
you can't purchase.
Something else with pricing I should add is that more and more there's a trend saying they give you a big list, and then we give them a quote, and they say, we got X amount, we got $5,000, we got $7,000, that's it. It's like they don't even attempt to alter their list and remove it. They want everything on their list for this amount of money. Where in the past, the producers and coordinators would haggle with the DP or the director, like, can we lose this and this? I mean, that still happens to an extent, but much less. And it's really frustrating because on the equipment side, the rental side, we all try so hard to give such great customer service. It's off the charts. And I don't think it's reciprocated on the other side with the production side. As I always say, wouldn't it be nice if we could do this work without clients? In a way, you know, because we give such great customer service and knowledge center that the rental house is. And I don't feel that but I know the producers are getting squeezed as well. So it's just super frustrating. And every day it's like, I feel like I'm Monty Hall, you know, let's make a deal. And it's like, can you just accept the price?
So discounting certainly will play into kind of how you price it too.
Yeah, we've also started kind of looking at tiers of product. So to the sort of brand recognition question from earlier, we may have the brands that you recognize, but then we may have some lower budget options. So when someone says, oh, I got $500, we're not lowering the value of what would be a more premium product. We're giving you something that may be more value conscious. But we've just started to experiment with that recently as an idea.
So once your equipment does arrive, you have it labeled, you have it shelved, you know, what happens next? Do you have to train your staff? You have to market it? How do you get it into the hands of your clients?
We'll do some kind of staff training, have meetings, and then people will figure it out, calling up the manufacturer if they need to, but not really formal sessions on stuff, you know, unless the manufacturing rep is there.
Yeah, our staff is excellent at the figure it out phase. Because we don't formally, to Michael's point, have any real classes of training because we have those vendor manufacturer relationships. We may be able to get somebody to come in, or we know they're a phone call away, but we consider it part of the job to set up a piece of equipment and just go play around with it. If you know if you got time to lean, you got time to sweep. If you got time to lean, you got time to pull a piece of gear off the shelf, whether it be new or old, depending on how long you've been with us. And just play around with it. We don't view that as a waste of time in any capacity.
Yeah, I know. So our shop, we're a little different than the big guys in town from the standpoint we have a lot of high turnover because we do a lot of training and secondary education kind of stuff. Obviously, PERG. Where we get a lot of people, you know, and obviously their ambitions are to get on set. You know, so most of the folks coming through were started off, you know, through our internship or with some of the schools and the credit programs we have with them. The best ones kind of stick around as day players and part-timers. The best of those kind of turn into the few full-time people we'll have on staff. And then even the full-timers we usually have for, you know, about a year or so and get them set up to kind of wind up on the best crews in town that we're all really close with, to where most of the biggest, you know, gaffers and keys in town are all, most of their crews are all made up of people that started with us at one point in time, even before I got here. It was something the original owner had done for a very long time, and it's bared a lot of fruit for us because we have a lot of loyalty in the market and have a lot of, you know, contacts in just about every group around. And so it's great because most of the people have that ambition to want to learn new gear and want to try and experiment. So anytime we get new things, yeah, it's like, you know, if it wasn't with the manufacturer on a demo day, you know, we'll play around with it, experiment with stuff. Like even with the new sky panels, like we love doing R&D stuff, and we ended up finding a bunch of kind of bugs they had, and was working with Ari and back in Germany on troubleshooting and getting data for them and certain things, which, I mean, I love doing that kind of stuff, and most of the people here like that too, because they're all, you know, electricians and grips and training for the most part, and we get a lot of camera people too, that because Keslo and Panavision don't do a whole lot out here, to where, yeah, we'll have, you know, aspiring cinematographers who just got out of school come and work with us and hang out and experiment and, you know, keep the education side of it going. So it just kind of filters into that, really. And then as far as spreading word, it's just, you know, I'd say it's mostly just calling people, emailing, having them come over to the shop. We'll do a little bit on social media, but it's not, you know, a huge factor in our market, really, just because our network is very close knit. You know, it's a small market, and so we kind of know all the players in town, know everybody really around, and it's just easier to text, call, and the like. Plus, it, you know, gives you more FaceTime and personal time, really, than just doing social media blasts.
So once you've trained up your staff, your entire market knows that you have all of your equipment, and it's kind of an active rental inventory now. You know, how do you maintain your equipment? Do you have to certify people in your staff sometimes? And how do you keep, we talked a lot about firmware updates already, so we may not need to touch back on that, but how do you kind of keep repairs going? Do you have a repair department? Do you send stuff out?
Yeah, we have a dedicated repair department in all 3 of our locations, and we do internal and external repair. So depending on the level of manufacturer engagement, that dictates how deep into it we can get. There's those who obviously have more official programs and those who are just starting up now. So that ranges from, you know, person to person, meeting to, you know, manufacturer to manufacturer. As far as the check-in process, we kind of have a standardized, just, hey, when it comes in, you go through X, Y, and Z, test it out. If it passes muster, that's good enough to go back on the shelf. It's once it's damaged or it needs a further repair that it really goes to the repair department.
We train our staff in repair. Some like lens stuff we've sent to different, you know, over to Europe and back east in LA for training, and then camera stuff down to LA. And then a lot of repair knowledge comes over the phone and FaceTime. It's pretty amazing how much you can learn just with FaceTime on your phone. And then other sort of heavy repair like tripod heads and stuff like that, we do out of our Seattle office. And we have somebody that specializes in that type of stuff.
Yeah, and I'll point out again, the manufacturer relationship is really important here because their support in that repair world is invaluable.
And even then, sometimes it proves difficult because we may have a relationship with the sales reps, or the product reps. And then you kind of open in a secondary relationship with repair departments or service departments. So sometimes that can prove challenging because the things that we've fostered, you know, people in this group with the relationships they have may be completely different than the relationships somebody else in our organization has with the same organization that we have a relationship with. So sometimes you kind of need to stem off of your current relationships and sometimes even build new ones.
Great, thank you. So moving on to kind of the next big thing, one of you touched on it, I think it was Ryan, end of life and retirement. Do Do you sell used equipment? No. Do you just retire it? What happens?
We sell it. I mean, my policy, you know, we're in the Northwest. My policy has always been to try to sell equipment out of the market just to make it less, you know, convenient for a local person to buy it and then be my competitor. I mean, I have sold stuff locally, obviously, but we just sell, for the most part, we still sell stuff on eBay, old cameras. And the only thing we really sell are old cameras. We don't, in media maybe, you know, stuff like that. We don't sell lenses. They last forever for the most part.
Yeah,
we've-
definitely. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, you know, I think the philosophy I kind of inherited is we didn't really sell too much, so we have like a lot of legacy stuff that is definitely obsolete by, you know, in today's markets and what's requested. It's something we're trying to get better at. Kind of as Michael was saying, we, you know, owner ops have a lot of gravity in our market, because if they, you know, we start selling stuff to them, it very is possible they could turn around and end up as competition, or we lose a rental because, you know, oh, so and so now took it. So it's always a bit of a balancing act, I think, with the owner ops. So we try to work with them, and we'll buy gear for them and things along those lines. So it's just kind of that's a tricky one, but certainly trying to get better at flipping some of the inventory and not just letting it, you know, get so old into the point that it just is now eating up storage space, or, you know, because I always feel bad about having to just straight up send something to the recycling for metal. But you know, yeah, whether it's finding a buyer in Mexico or Texas or somewhere, even if it's like unloading stuff really cheap, I always feel better. It's like, even if these, like, here's these old LTM HMIs, if I can actually find a home for them, it's like that'd be great, you know, rather than just ending up in a landfill.
No, Ryan was spot on to our problem as well, which is, I would say there's sort of two tiers at this point, which is what Ryan was saying, the legacy gear, which probably we've crossed the threshold to be able to sell, because, you know, who wants it at this point? There's plenty of replacements. And what do you do with it? Do you dispose of it? Does it go to a landfill? Like, who's to say? Whereas the newer gear, now we're a little bit more aware of, there are shorter life cycles than there used to be. So we probably, you know, in the old days of tungsten, it was going to last forever. Now, as LEDs are iterating, we know this thing's probably going to be replaced by the next thing next year. To an example, Aperture 600C Pro 2 just came out. We were obviously aware of its release cycle, and we sold off all of our 600C original versions right before those came out. So we didn't want to get stuck with an older generation. So we're trying to be a little bit more proactive in that conversation.
Yeah, we're guilty of not being proactive enough with technology shifts.
I would say every rental house has this exact problem. I don't think maybe 4-wall with their used lighting is good about it, but I think for the most part, we all have that shelf we don't talk about.
Yeah. Great. Well, that's kind of what I had for today. So thank you everyone for participating and coming in. We do have some questions, and I'm going to open it up for questions from everyone. Let's see, we're doing some answering. Thank you. So one question here from Nick at Video Facts in San Francisco. Have you seen an effect in marketing certain pieces? So, you know, have you seen an effect on kind of how much your equipment rents based on how you're marketing it, either posting on social media or having open houses to introduce equipment?
I don't know if there's been a direct correlation. Going back to the 600C Pro 2 that Aperture came out with, we were very early to have it, but we've also had a very strong brand recognition relationship with Aperture. So we blasted social the second we had it. It's been rented nonstop. I don't know if that's because somebody saw, it's a new light I'm going to call Lux, or they saw it on our social. We're not as deep diving into, we like metrics, but unfortunately we don't have like very good like tracking metrics of where leads come from. We just sort of, hey, we got the business, huzzah.
Right. Right.
But
It's hard to correlate that, I think.
yeah, I mean, it would be great. But sometimes with the new stuff, I think it's just people start calling around, and if you have it, it's going out.
Yeah, no, for our market, honestly, nowadays, not so much, just because with social media and internet, everybody's kind of learning about stuff at the same time. And so we'll get more of the questions of, hey, are you guys carrying this yet? And, we either are, aren't, or can source it. But, I remember 15 years ago, or like whenever Aerie started coming out with the M line, before social media really had kind of taken off and the like, it was more relevant then, where we would actually, hey, we got this, you guys want to come see it, and we do little demo events, and then once people saw it, it's like, oh, that was all they ever would order at that point. Yeah, where nowadays it's like, it's not uncommon, like I'll either learn some stuff at a trade show, or I'll have other people kind of come to me and, have you seen this yet? And they'll send me, YouTube videos or demo or links to a manufacturer, and we'll check it out. And yeah, we usually try to like get, demo units of stuff before making any, bigger purchases and the like. But yeah, I'd say probably not a lot. Not a lot of influence really with us, our marketing side of things, just because it seems so prevalent across the board for everybody in our industry to know what is and what is coming.
Yeah, so I mean, I think Ryan, you've mentioned that you just kind of market organically, if you will, and that you kind of call people and say, hey, we've got this, you should check it out. I know when I was at rentals, a lot of times I would, if a gaffer was working on a job and renting from us, I'd say, hey, we just got this new light, and just put it on the job, check it out.
No, absolutely. And our rental house, I mean, it's definitely, I would say I haven't really seen it in many other like bigger markets, because there's so much more competition. But with, MBS and Cinelease and Uni in town, like they've really kind of kept everybody out. And thank God we're just, a feeder fish amongst the sharks, and we play nice with them, and they play nice with us and sub rent from us, and vice versa. But our company's been around for, over 35 years. And even the original owner was one of the early gaffers out here, helped get the rebate program started, help get the IATSE local started. So many people in our neck of the woods have either gotten their first job with us on set, with the original owner or myself, or through our internship, things like that. So our rental house is kind of like the little, coffee shop that everyone will just kind of pop into from time to time and share some gossip and talk about things. And so we love the fact that we can kind of play this like little concierge role in our market, as like the one big local rental house that can have a lot of info on gear or what shows are coming in and this and that. So yeah, I'd say it's definitely still word of mouth and organic and the like from our standpoint, more than marketing efforts online or traditional ways.
All right. I think that's what we have for today. Thank you, everybody. Anyone else have any other questions for us?
Gaston had a question about gear coming off a package in the chat.
Oh, yep, I just saw that. Thank you. So Gaston, how do you handle the following scenario? Is this question. So you have a full package that's ready for prep. The crew comes to start pulling stuff out. As an example, all the Teradeks, high five, and a couple monitors. Crew comes and starts pulling stuff out, I would assume, of their own equipment. So how do you handle the situation where you have an entire package prepped and ready to go, and then you have an AC that comes in to prep that, and they are pulling out I think, the same equipment that's on your order. How do you kind of handle that situation when you already have equipment that's ready to go and it looks like it's all going to get cut off of your order because someone begins to prep with their own equipment on that order?
From the camera side, what Gaston's talking about is this is like the most sensitive issue that we deal with in rental, dealing with customers and clients, is personal gear. In our mind, the camera assistant gets the fizz, the single channel, onboard monitor 13-inch, nothing else. They get their personal tools. They don't get batteries. They don't get Teradeks transmission. And they're like, hey, we got to make a buck. It's like, hey, we got to make a buck too. We have families that we're supporting, film festivals and scholarships and everything else that we sponsor, and they're not doing that. They're not doing 100 freebies a year or discounted jobs for marketing purposes. So it's a battle that you're starting with the camera assistant, and it's really hard to deal with the people that come in from New York or LA. But the local ones you can deal with more. I mean, I had a car commercial in late May, early June. The AC was from LA, brought all his stuff, which was fine, didn't have any transmission. I was fine with it. And then at the end of the prep, he's like, oh yeah, by the way, I've got my second ACs bringing 4 block batteries and 12 onboards, put them on the contract. I didn't see him. Did he bring them?
Right.
You know, that was a lot of money and it's dishonest and they didn't even need them. It's a huge conflict of interest and the studios need to take note, and so do the commercial production companies.
Yeah,
I
this
think-
is a clear. Well, I'll let you speak. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, I know for us, because it definitely is now more and more prevalent in lighting with a lot of the wireless tech and other things, and we definitely spend a lot of time, and everything's got to be hashed out up front and on paper. So we don't, if it's a last minute deal and someone's like, oh, well, I own this, sky panel and I wanted to get it on, then if it wasn't done ahead of time and there isn't, we worked out a percentage for a pass through or whatever it is of like, oh, you want to put your stuff on. We always try to work with the crews because so many just have their stuff now. Yeah, if it's not done ahead of time and has paperwork in conjunction with whatever the deal may be, non-starter, because then from a liability standpoint, insurance standpoint, all of those things, yeah, doing the handshake stuff under the table is, that's just kind of a bygone era that will eventually blow up in your face in some form or fashion, doing the gentleman's agreement stuff. So yeah, happy to always work with clients and make deals with their stuff on shows, but always up front. And yeah, no surprises, that's for sure.
I mean, we're the rental houses. We have all the responsibility.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so frustrating that they can just come in and basically steal money from us by putting on their personal equipment. They get a fair amount, that's fine, but beyond that, not cool.
No, and there's been a trend over the past year with rental houses kind of fighting back a little bit on the MBS, the Cinellis scale, because the past year being horrible to all of us, assets have just sat on shelves. So every rental house is overburdened with gear that, they don't have shelf space all of a sudden, going to the much earlier question, because they allocated shelf space for a rotated inventory. And now it's on the floor. And I've had a few gaffer friends who have had their gear specifically downgraded or rejected that normally they would have gotten the green light, because everyone's, all the rental houses need to show an ROI to their investors. So now that's almost a twofold conversation, because yeah, you want to keep your gaffers happy or your ACs happy, but you also now need to keep your money people happy, where previously, as long as you were showing profit, you're probably fine.
And Steve Spears said in the chat that it's time for a PERG meeting on working with and handling owner-op rentals affecting your rentals, and boy, is he right.
Yes, I think we're overdue for it. Believe me, there's been a ton of conversations about this going on, and trying to figure out an approach to it is the hard part. And but so it hasn't been like Oh, I got an answer and it's done. And I'm just going to announce it now. That was easy. No problem.
Great.
Yeah, no, it's a real dilemma. All right. Yeah, I think when I go back to sharing here.
Everybody, we are still accepting EWI applications. So the EWI program is still up and running. This copy break was part of our educational series for EWI and for our candidates. We still have 5 grants available, so please apply, and we have candidates waiting and ready.
If people, I imagine that as things start to get busier, some companies may be in the mode of hiring. And if you're in the mode of hiring, then you really ought to look at this opportunity because it's a win-win. All right. Well, I just wrap it up by saying thanks very much to our panelists. Really terrific conversation. I'm learning this stuff. This is I hope it's beneficial. I hope everybody is enjoying it as much as I am. And please keep your eye open for invitations for future events. Thanks everyone for joining us today.
Thanks.